Yeah. Let me put it this way, the email said they were attached. I don't know if they were.
All right, so welcome to our monthly legislative coffee. Welcome, legislators. We appreciate you coming. I'm your moderator. Most of you, two of the three of you have had me moderate during First Friday Forum, so it will be different than that. So, in the spirit of the season, all right, now, I know the first thing I'm going to hear, Joan, Jean, this is partisan, but I want to remind you, these are Republican legislators. And if we had a Democrat legislator in here, I would do the same thing. So just in the spirit of the season, I just thought I'd wear this hat. And
I don't know that everybody can read that, Richard.
well, this says, "Make Ottawa Great Again." Okay, so, all right, thank you. Well, thank you all for being here. We appreciate you being here. Let me get the housekeeping out of the way. I want to thank our sponsors, the Ottawa Area Chamber of Commerce, Legislative Action Committee, and if members of that committee are here, would you please stand up? I think please stand up. So let's thank them. And Almeda, she gets a special pass. She doesn't have stand up, but she is on that committee. So. Franklin County Farm Bureau Association, will you please stand up if you're here representing Franklin? All right, Almeida, there you go. All right, thank you very much. And American Legion Post number 60, if you are representing them, thank you very much. And other thank yous go out to the Franklin County Farm Bureau women for the refreshments back there, City of Ottawa for providing this fine facility and the coffee back there, and Matt Simonson. Matt, please stand up. And making sure that it's on the Government Access Channel, and in case you haven't read the news, Matt and his wife are going to be first-time parents. All right, so let's get started. We've kind of tried to change the format. We'd like to ask some hard-hitting questions, and we'd like to get as much out of you as what the crowd can hear, so we can move through this kind of fast, and there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. We really want it to be contained with one subject. Please, no pontificating. Let's give the legislators a chance to answer. So, 1 minute or less for each of you. Tell us how the last month has gone. 1 minute. 1 minute or less. 1 minute or less. So let's start with Representative Jones.
1 minute or less. Last month has been it's been fine, I guess. It's typical when we get up there to the legislature that there's going to be bills that people run that you don't really expect them to run or focus on, that I personally don't deem as important. And then there's going to be bills that are super important that kind of get put to the wayside, or that I feel like are important that aren't getting pushed forward. But I feel like that's been kind of going on. But we still got a little bit of time left, so we're starting to get to the important stuff, I guess. Now we dealt with some things that I deem important. I know. And so, well, I felt like that's gone on a little bit, but being my fourth time, I'm beginning to understand that that's pretty normal. But other than that, it's been good. I guess the main thing that, and I'll stop here, the main thing that I feel like has, in this last month is just bills that come up that just totally disappear, and so they get a lot of hype, and I never even see them. And so it's one of those things that it's strange, but it's the way our process works. And so, yeah, that's kind of been the last month for me. So,
thank you. Senator Tyson.
Well, good morning, everyone. 1 minute or less.
1 minute or less.
Same old, how's that? The interesting thing, I was going to cover several topics. The docking building, I'll touch on that whenever I get a chance. Schools, we had two bills, Senate Bill 311, 505, both important bills that need to be discussed. Wildlife and Parks bought some land. They bought 9 tracts of land, only got 8 of them. Paid for 9, but only got 8. I would think you'd want to hear a little more about that. And also noxious weeds. There was noxious weeds on the land they bought, and we have a noxious weed bill that we're trying to address that problem in Kansas. So one of the worst offenders in the state is the state not taking care of their noxious weeds. So besides that, property tax. We had two-day hearing on property tax. We've had valuations go up. I'm researching, and I can't touch on it any more than that in a minute. So I appreciate you guys being here, and there's some heavy topics we need to discuss. So
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. Representative Finch, 1 minute or less.
Thank you, Richard. With due respect to your hat, I think Ottawa has always been and still is great, so I'm not sure we need to make it great again. Thank you to our sponsors this morning. Thank you to all of you for coming out. I'd say the last month has been like a snowball rolling down a mountain. We're getting to that part of the session where it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There's more things coming. There's bills that have been filed in just the last week that are getting a lot of attention, and then underneath all of that are the real substantive issues that we have to address and deal with. Revenue numbers coming in low, school finance cases, and the day-to-day operations of the state, and there's a lot of good things going on as well. Those don't always get the media attention, but hopefully we can dig into some of those this morning and talk about them, and we'll leave plenty of time for your questions. I think we did it in less than a minute. Thank you.
Thank you. Good man. So let's get right to it. Senator Tyson spoke about the docking building, and our first question for the panel is the governor has vetoed that bill, and it's over in the Senate right now, or maybe not, or it's kind of resting, or whatever. But anyway, so can you tell us, will you vote to override the veto, or will you vote to sustain the veto? So, Senator Tyson, would you like to go first since it's in your chamber?
yes, I will vote to override the veto unless, and I hate to qualify it, but actually I was very proud. There was several, Ottawa leadership was in the chamber when we had the motion to override the veto in the Senate. And they got to see a little bit of behind the scenes how things work. Yes, and Janet was there, and it was very interesting, the dynamics of it. There was a motion to do the veto override, and then the debate started. Then one of the senators made a motion to table the motion. Well, that's a non-debatable motion, so you have to vote it right away. Well, you have to have 27 votes in the Senate to do a veto override, 2/3 majority in both chambers. And so what ended up happening was they had well over 27 votes that voted against tabling it. So there were the votes to do the veto override. Well, in the meantime, the governor, staff, and opponents of the veto override are tweeting, texting, visiting, calling, and pressuring senators to change their vote, not to support the veto override. So what ended up happening is if we would have closed on it right away, it would have passed, but they got enough people to turn their votes, and we will be caucusing on it next week, and the Senate will have a vote on the veto override next week.
Thank you. Representative Jones.
I feel like I don't really, this has been so far off my radar, other than I did read it in the news because we dealt with this.
Did you vote for the original bill to prohibit the government?
Yeah,
so
I did.
If he
and so,
does it, where do you think you'll be at?
Well, right now they're looking at making it historic and all that kind of stuff. Given the money that goes into it too, I would be willing to vote to override. I would.
Thank you, Representative Finch. Did you vote for the original bill to prohibit the docking?
Yes, I did vote for the prohibition. I think it went on as an amendment to the budget, actually, and I voted for the amendment. I did not ultimately vote for the budget in our chamber. I would vote to override the veto. It contains a moratorium on tearing down the building, which I think is important. We have, in recent years, farmed out a lot of state offices to private buildings under private ownership, and we're paying lease payments to those folks. And we're told that that's cheaper than maintaining our own buildings. How we can cover a lease payment that will pay for the use of the space, the maintenance, the taxes, and all of that, and the insurance, and somehow that's cheaper than doing it ourselves, I'm not sure. But I think we need more study before we tear down the docking building, so I will vote to override.
Right. Thank you.
I would like to, it was Senate Bill 250, it was a standalone bill, and part of the issue is if we don't override this veto, there was a 10% fee in the contract if we stopped the demolishing of the building. And so we would be paying the contracting firm $3 million if we don't do a veto right on this Senate Bill 250. So it is critical. But they're using the opponents of the override are using the fact, they're saying that our state bond rating will decrease if we veto this bill. We cannot connect the dots on that, so I'm waiting to hear the debate on it.
Well, that was my next question, was how does it affect the credit rating? Because I can't connect the dots either. So anyway, but that's answered. Medicare expansion, all right? How is the lack of Medicare expansion affecting the hospitals in your district? Representative Jones, would you go first? And would you tell us the hospitals you have in your district, please?
Medicare expansion, Medicaid expansion?
Medicaid expansion.
Can't care, Medicaid expansion. I have a hospital down in Garnett. It's part of Via Christi, essentially quick access hospital down in Garnett. Just did a revamp a couple years ago. I was blessed to be able to be a part of that opening, and so if you haven't been down there, it's state of the art. It's beautiful down there. Essentially, it's if you buy into if you expand, essentially the hospital, it's more money for the hospitals quickly. It's not a whole lot for mine, but it's something. And so hospitals want to expand Medicare. I mean, it allows you to have more money for your hospital, and so ultimately they're losing. When we don't do that, they're losing money too, to a degree. So the trouble is that if we buy in if we buy in, I keep saying buy in, if we buy in, it's going to cost us, or could cost us, a lot more than what we actually expect as a state. And so there hasn't been a whole lot of movement on Medicaid expansion that I know of at this point. So.
Well, it did cost a couple representatives their seat on a committee, right?
Oh, are you talking about,
right?
Yeah, no, I didn't get moved. Are you talking about Health and Human Services? No. Yeah, there's taxes and different things like that. The movement from costing, it depends. Mine wasn't personal, moving me from Health and Human Services to education. But yeah, is that what you meant?
No.
Okay.
I was not on you about this one.
Okay.
Representative Finch, hospitals in your district?
I have Ransom Memorial Hospital in my district. My last conversation with Matt Hine on the subject, I think it's a little over $300,000 that not expanding Medicaid has cost Ransom Memorial Hospital annually. I know that the Hospital Association, of which RMH is a member, has looked at a different way of doing that, more of what they call a red state solution that utilizes different provisions of the law, including waivers and waiver exceptions, in order to get the increased funding, but not create a system where you're actually bankrolling those people who are at 138% of poverty level. And this, you want to talk about getting deep in the weeds. Healthcare policy is deep in the weeds, but this system instead relies on everybody paying something for their health care, so nobody gets a free ride in that gap between 100% and 138%. I don't think that bill has any chance this session. I don't think any bill pertaining to CanCare or Medicaid expansion has any chance this year. House leadership is not going to bring it up. They're not going to allow it to run. They have been moving the bill every 9 days or so because we have a rule in the House that on the 10th day, if a bill is laid over for 10 days, 70 members of the House can vote to bring it above the line and have the debate. And so every 9th day, the bill gets moved. So that debate is probably not going to happen. I do hope that the governor's task force that he announced in the State of the State to examine rural health care and help come up with a solution does bear some fruit, because we need to do something to help, whether it's cost containment in healthcare, whatever the ultimate modality is. I'm cheered that we're actually looking at the problem now and trying to come up with a solution.
Thank you. Senator Tyson, how many hospitals in your district?
I actually have 4 that are in the district: Ottawa, Garnett, Iola, and Osawatomie State Hospital. Now, I consider Fort Scott Hospital and Paola. I have constituents that are served by those hospitals, so I do have a very large area. The interesting thing, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, we need to have the conversation on Medicaid expansion. There are states that have looked at it, they've come up with a solution for their state. We need a Kansas solution. That we need to have the conversation. There was informational hearings last year, and there hasn't been that attempt this year. The Senate had a little bit of problem. I'm not in the mix of leadership. I'm not sure the dynamics, what went on, but our Health and Human Services, or our Health Chairman in the Senate, was removed from her position. So the Health Committee in the Senate is a little rocky as to what's being discussed and not discussed in that. And I'm afraid it is hampered going forward in the Senate side on that. There is a bill on the Senate side. But I do think we need to have a Kansas solution. The interesting thing is, Indiana, Utah, there's several states that we can look at, their models, and learn from them, what happened with them, and look going forward. Another thing that I've talked about, and I would encourage you guys too to talk to your U.S. legislators, is if our veterans had access to our local hospitals, that would help our hospitals more than anything, is because they wouldn't, and it would help our veterans too. They wouldn't have to drive out of service area. They could support the local hospital. It would be a win for everyone. So I please encourage you to visit with your U.S. senators, U.S. representatives, all of them, not just the ones for this area, and let them know that that's a feasible solution that we would like to push in Kansas. So,
thank you. Does the Senate have the same 9-day rule?
We have a similar rule, but we don't have the games going on that they do. I'm sorry.
I'm not at the board on those, so it's okay.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
There you go.
we have other stuff going on, but
Little different perception of each chamber there. So,
Yeah.
all right. One more question on Medicaid expansion. Is there a window when Kansas does not have a choice of yes or no?
not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next topic. This isn't very controversial. Let's talk about education a little.
An easy one.
All right. So, Supreme Court decision. Can you tell us your read on the Supreme Court decision that Kansas schools children are not receiving a uniform and equal education? My understanding is that they kicked it back to you. They did not put a dollar amount in the decision, from what I understand. I could be wrong, so tell me if I'm wrong. So how will your chambers deal with that?
I think it's my turn to go first.
Yes, it is.
There are two bills that were just introduced late in the week, one in the Senate by Senator Masterson and one in the House by Representative Reichman into the respective committees. The Senate version, which Senator Tyson can probably speak better to, but my understanding is it basically reduces funding for some districts and funds others. So it does not add any new money. The plan in the House adds new money and uses the Extraordinary Needs Fund, which is a fund created when we did the block grant bill a couple years ago, that's supposed to help if school enrollment changes drastically or something happens within the district that they end up needing additional funds, they can petition to that fund and get that money. So the Reichman bill has about $35 million in it. $17 million comes from that Extraordinary Needs Fund. It also sees some winners and losers in that some of the districts lose money, others gain money, but it's not as pronounced as it is under the Masterson plan. I also know there are discussions about other plans that are slightly more expensive but don't do harm to any district that still utilize that Extraordinary Needs Fund. I'd like to see some of those. I don't think that the Supreme Court told us you have to take money away from districts under their ruling. I think they said you need to equalize, and that involves going back, at least for now, to the old equalization portion of the formula. You can keep the block grants, but you just kind of add that equalization piece back on it. And I think there's a way we could utilize the Extraordinary Needs Fund to make sure that no district has to lose funding in the next year or two while we design the new formula.
Thank you. Senator Tyson.
Thank you. We've had some interesting hearings this week on education, and some of this came up yesterday in committee, coincidentally. We were told that adequacy has been reached, that it is the equalization portion that's the issue. And so there are several different items. One of the interesting, this hasn't been talked about before. I've thought about it, but it came up in committee yesterday as to the legislature give a true block grant to the Department of Education, and the Department of Education establish the rules in the leveling of the playing field for the schools. So that's an interesting viewpoint from it. All of you, well, not all of you, but most of you are familiar with Dale Dennis. And I did talk to Dale after the committee hearing on this. He thought it was a perspective that he hadn't heard before either. So, you know, everything's on the table right now. They are discussing, which is good, items that have not been talked about before in order to address this issue. As far as the Senate bill, I want to talk about Senate Bill 505 yesterday. For those of you that don't know, it is a bill that would take the balances, the unencumbered funds from the schools and put it back to the state. It would cap the schools at 15% and bring the rest of the money back to the state. Well, it was kind of interesting because we keep hearing how the schools have been cut and how they've been cut to the bone. They just don't have any money. Well, the unencumbered funds that were talked about yesterday, it's over $700 million. I do not support this legislation. I do not support taking money from schools that have been good players and been frugal with their money and good stewards of their money. But what was discussed yesterday, so we'll see if the bill goes forward or not. One of the items that did come out, both parties, that the proponents and opponents of the bill discussed, was establishing a cap. There are some schools that have over 30% of their budget in money just sitting in the bank account. So that's an exorbitant amount of money, and so it is being addressed, and both sides were in agreement that going forward we could look at establishing an equation for those funds. I think that would be more beneficial to all of our schools. I think that would be more reasonable, and it was good to hear that both sides were working together on the bill and trying to figure out what would be best for the state of Kansas. Because obviously if the state is paying more than the school needs, then that becomes a question too. But there are schools that are working on less than 10% of encumbered funds. So we need to really balance this and make sure the money's getting to where it needs to go.
Thank you. One question before we move on. I heard you say that in your committee you were told adequacy has been reached. Who made that judgment? Who told you that? That
was stated by 2 or 3 conferees actually agreed on it. It was the equitable is the portion that, the equality, okay. The level.
Who were the conferees?
Oh, there were several conferees. There was 5 or 6 superintendents. Coincidentally, the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, I'm not sure what their, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I didn't understand that one either, but, so, yeah, there were several different, from different dynamics. The Kansas School Board Association, different groups testified.
Thank you. Representative Jones.
Thank you, yeah. Actually, the True Block grant to the Department of Education, that's the first I've heard of that, which, interesting. You know, you start to see some pretty unique ideas. We heard one in Education Committee that essentially it changed, it's just looking at a different funding formula, if you will. It just changes it from like the number of kids to average of this or that, and so people are looking at and coming up with ideas that they're trying to make work that would be best across the state. The one that came out of that Ron Reichman, the Reichman bill, and both these were heard on Friday. I don't even know all the details of them, but the people that carry them also kind of tends to be important. I think that the Senate is bringing forward a bill that matches the makeup of the Senate for the most part, and so the one that came forward, Reichman, which would be on the House side, I would think that it would be brought forward with the idea that it could possibly people get behind it and it could pass the House. Just looking at it on the surface, I don't know. I mean, I don't know though that it does exactly what we want it to do, or what we want it to do. This is going back to the question on the judge's ruling, because ultimately, they say they're going to close down the schools, and so makes me go, how? But at the same time, we want to do what we can to fix that portion of the ruling or of the opinion. So
follow-up question here, and then we'll get to a couple of questions from the audience. How are your school districts faring with the present funding formula? What do you hear from your school districts? And let's start, you have a unique perspective.
Sure.
Representative Jones, you sit on a school board in
Right.
Wellsville, right?
Yeah.
So can we start with you?
Yeah,
please?
the main issue when you do this is the main issue since the time I came on the school board, time I got in the legislature.
How many years have you been on the school
I've been
board?
on the school board now. This is my 5th year on the school board, and this is my 4th year as a state representative. The main issue is just looking at the future and saying, this is what we're going to have so we can plan on it. Somebody says, hey, you have $100,000 to use next year, you make your budget based on that. The trouble is we make our budget and then we find out what we have month to month, and sometimes it's $50 million less, and so we're going, what? How's this going to make sense? And so you don't know, and then you start saving a little bit just in case you don't have enough money at that point, and you to make up if the payment's going to be late or you don't have them out. So that's really what it comes down to, is just being able to have predictability, looking forward to be able to move forward with and know what you're going to have, and that's the scary part. So the funding formula and all those things, you want it. One thing that I think that the state has done well is paying the schools on time for the most part since the time I've been here, because that was a real issue prior to me actually being on the school board, getting on the school board, and then being at the legislature was just that. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is predictability. We need predictability on the school boards
Right.
for our actual funding.
Just one last question before we move on. Little trivia question here. Do you know who one of the last legislators were that served in the House and also served on their local school board?
No, I don't.
It was Representative James Lowther out of Emporia, who was a high school classmate of my father. So there you
Very good.
can use
Wow.
that trivial.
Do you know when that was?
All right,
How long ago?
It was in the, well, I can tell you now.
Okay.
I can tell you. It was in the 70s and I
70s.
believe early 80s, so. Senator Tyson, how are your school districts
Well-
faring with the current funding?
Okay, touching a 6-county area, I have 22 public schools in my district. So I have a very diverse, obviously, group, anywhere from Ottawa to, small schools in Anderson County or other counties. The schools, I've spoke to most of the superintendents, actually all of them at some point or another. What's interesting is I have some that'll tell me behind closed doors that they're doing fine and that they don't have a problem, but as soon as they get in public, it's a different story, which is quite disappointing. I just want the facts out there, how they're truly doing. I've looked at their budgets, I've looked at the numbers. Dale Dennis gives me the runs as to what money's going toward the schools, whether it's an increase or not. And so some of it is, some of the schools were decreased because they had grant money for buildings, so they obviously had less, but overall the schools had a block grant increase. One of my school districts I was so impressed with, when I called the superintendent, I said, you're the only school in this Senate district that is not going to have an increase. This was in 2014 before the block grant. I said, you're going to have funding come towards your community and it's going to lower your property tax, but the school itself is not going to get an increase. And the superintendent's response was, if it's going to help my community, it's good for the school. I was so impressed with the superintendent. So we do have some really good people to work with. I've had several superintendents contact me that have the money in the bank, and they don't want to lose that funding, obviously. They've been working diligently to keep some in reserve, and I can understand that. So we want to work with them, and that's what we need. We need a good working relationship with the schools. We want to have that. There's nobody, well, I can't speak for every legislator. There's 165, but I know myself, I want what's best for the schools and for the children and for our communities.
Thank you. Representative Finch. How are your school districts faring?
Well, I don't think our school board members and school administrators are any different than the rest of Kansans. You ask them how they're doing, and they always say fine. You never run into somebody at the grocery store and say, how you doing? They go, oh, okay. Yeah, let me tell you all the ways my life is screwed up. We are a strong-willed and a persevering people. And I think that's what you see in your school board members and your superintendents and your educators, that they're going to tell you, yeah, we're doing okay. But I think that the perception from many in the education community is they are tired of things being done to them. They would like to be part of the conversation. We have a lot of legislation that seems to just spring forward fully formed in Topeka from some places unknown, relative to a lot of different things that I don't know that we need to be legislating about when it comes to education in school districts. And the funding piece, as Representative Jones said, stability is key. We've talked on and on in our tax code, and groups like the Kansas Chamber have talked about the importance of stability to the business community, how it is that people who invest money make decisions. Well, people in education are no different. They're investing money, they're trying to make decisions, and the reason they have the reserve funds that they do on hand is in many cases because they don't know what the legislature is going to do session to session. Are they going to make them come up to Topeka and justify their next bond issue? Are they going to have to spend money out of this fund for this purpose? Are they going to see a complete destruction of the system under which we worked with no guidance on which direction we're going with a new formula? So I think they're right to be wary. I think they are wary, but I think they are strong, and like the rest of us Kansans, when you ask them how they're doing, they're going to tell you, oh, I'm fine.
Thank you. I would, that's an interesting remark you make about wanting to come to the table, because I know that local government, and I've heard Senator Tyson say that the best local government is that that's closest to the people. I appreciate you saying that. But it is kind of a frustrating set of circumstances where local government is not a partner at the table. It's top down, which is more of a discussion than we can do here. So let's get one question from the audience. A short question, one subject, please. Yes, sir.
Darren McKeon from Ottawa. I realize that they're saying that a lot of tricks going on with the leadership with pulls, stunts, and pull balls, and whatever. And it seems to me, as bad as our financial situation is here in the state, it seems that the democratic process is even more of an issue. This the committee shall not through bills without giving time to both sides of the argument to speak. Or use the gut and go procedure where they put in new language in the bill that was all pre-existing and has nothing to do with what was there before. They wanted to pass an offices of Supreme Court justices can be impeached just for attempting to usurp the power of the legislative branch or the executive branch. My question to you is, what will you do to help stop the blatant abuse of power that we currently see going on in our state government?
Thank you. So, you want to go first, Representative Jones? Look at me like you were ready.
Sure. I have some ideas. Well, and a lot of this goes to the front of the legislative session when we decide on rules, and there's changes we've tried to make with transparency and things like that. The rules part of it, and rules allow for gut and go. Rules allow for moving things every 9 days or whatever, which honestly I did not even know that you could do that. There's so much to the rules too. Yeah, I had no idea. But then there's rules that you're like, that won't be important, and then it turns out that it can be very, very important, and it's used. And that's why I call my newsletter The Playground, because it's just a bunch of it's rules that guide the legislative process, and it's tricky. And it also goes in the term limits too, because the longer you've been there, the better you know the rules and the way you can use stuff. So there was a legislator the other day, he's a friend of mine, and he was going to use. How are they going to do it? They were going to ramrod something essentially through a committee, and I said, that's not really cool, man. And he said, well, the other team does it, and I said, yeah, but that doesn't necessarily make it right. But again, it's the rules. It can be done that way. And so, yeah, it feels distasteful, but at the beginning of a process, if we would stop it by saying we're not going to use these rules, but then you have to have the majority of the people say, well, that's a bad rule. So it comes back to the rules, and I walk away sometimes just shaking my head going, that's just not cool. But that's that's how I feel like I got short end of the stick. So I agree with you. We did just pass out of the House something that has to do with streaming live, so you can see. At least you can see the games being played live, so, and we'll see how that goes over in the Senate, I assume.
But
it
my
will.
understanding, that's not for every committee meeting, that's only for certain select committee meeting chosen by the legislative coordinating council, right, legislative council?
I think the real issue is the money it could take to actually, to pull it off.
Well, there's no-
already
there's no
there's
money
legislators.
to- there's no
Right,
money
right,
to have a lot
right.
of
That's what I'm
these-
saying, already on Twitter, you can follow on Twitter, hashtag Kansas Leg, and you'll see a lot of what goes on, and because a lot of us use that, tell what's going on in the actual.
Twitter gives me a headache.
I know, but.
So, thank you, Senator Tyson.
Well, this is nothing new. The process you've defined has been going on for years. What is new is that we do have more ways of watching the process and hearing about the process, which is great because it does create more open government. And don't always trust what's on Twitter because I've seen some of those posts and they're not quite accurate. In fact, a prime example this week was an emails and a post on Facebook was saying that Senate Bill 311 was behind closed doors. It was a secret bill. Nobody could attend the meeting. I mean, it just had all these checkpoints that were so inaccurate and illegal. There is just no way that that was going to happen. So we found out in committee that, and you could have looked it up, anybody could have looked it up, Senate Bill 311 was posted last year in May. It was introduced by somebody, so it's been out there for almost a year. It wasn't a secret meeting. In fact, we had more notice on that bill than we usually get on a hearing. It was, and that's just the way the process is. And am I saying it's correct? And no. Am I saying it doesn't need changed? No. But it is the current process, and we could step back and not be engaged in the process, and that would be worse for our district than anything. So I choose to be engaged, not a part of the games, not a part of the underlying portion that none of us like, but I do choose to be totally engaged in the process, understanding the rules, knowing how to get things done, and that is better for the 12th Senate District than anything else. If I just sit back and complain about the process and not do anything, what good would that be? So if I'm engaged and trying to be a part of the process, Senate Bill 311, that meeting was open. There were 4 television cameras in there. The room was packed. The microphone was on so people could hear outside. There were people recording the meeting so it could be listened to later. I mean, it is a transparent process. So.
Thank you. Representative Finch.
Well, Darrell, I agree with what's been said previously. These processes are nothing new. The gut-and-go process, the idea of trying to have a chairman jam a bill through a committee quickly, the notion that somebody would take the contents out and put something else in. And it's not unique to Kansas, actually. In some of the travels I've had and conversations I've had with legislators in other states, I think they call it hog shedding in South Dakota. It's not a gut and go, it's a hog shedding. So I like gut and go a little better, although that other term is a little more colorful. You asked what are we going to do to change that. I think a big problem we have is a lack of civility. I think that much of what you're talking about is overcome by being respectful of other people, respectful of other perspectives and opinions. We had a situation arise in one of my committees this week where the chairman wanted to get a couple of bills done that we'd only heard that day. And the standard is in a committee, if the bill is heard that day, you let it lay over a day before you work it, offer amendments and try to get it out. And members of the minority party were protesting that. They lodged objections, and the chairman went ahead and proceeded to work the bill. I voted no on 2 of those bills, and I like the merits of those bills, and I will support them when they come to the floor, but it was not the right way to do things at that moment, and so the best that I could do was to stand up so that these other viewpoints could be heard. Every legislator deserves the opportunity to prepare and craft amendments, to have those amendments debated, and much of what you're talking about goes away when we treat each other with civility. So that's been my commitment, what I try to bring to the process. I also think that sunshine is the greatest disinfectant. I've supported transparency measures in the rules and supported transparency measures on the floor. Is the live streaming bill we saw this week perfect? No, it's not. No legislation is perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. And the other thing I'll say is this, I'll put this right back on our audience today. You all are here and involved, and I appreciate that, but the reality is when people get involved, when the average citizen stands up and sends a letter, sends an email, makes a phone call, gets in touch with their legislator, things happen. And what you saw with Senate Bill 311 is a good example of that. Although the information in some cases that was put out was wrong, ultimately people spoke up and that bill got stopped. Representative Jones referenced a number of bills earlier, at least stopped for now, until further discussion takes place, because nothing's truly dead in Topeka. As Representative Jones said, earlier, there's a lot of bills you hear about, they create a huge flash publicly, and then they go away. And they go away in part because people stand up and get involved and say, look, I don't like that idea, you need to take another look at that and try it in a different way or do something else. So please continue to be involved.
And I can tell you from personal experience that all three of these individuals, you contact them, they do get back to you. I mean, they are busy people up there just like we are, but it's been my experience that they do. And just a little, here's for your trivia again. The carrier of the media stream bill who's been pushing it is an excellent and outstanding graduate of Emporia State University. I just thought I'd throw that in. Okay, another question from the crowd, please.
Well, and if I could follow up real quick, part of what's happened also is Washington politics has come to Kansas.
Exactly.
And that is a huge issue for all of us, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
My name is Stan Rouse from Ottawa. My question is about medical marijuana. What are your positions on it, and does it have any chance of passing legislatures? My understanding is that states like California that have medical marijuana laws that doctors routinely prescribe medical marijuana for people who have outstanding pain because of medical issues. Thank you.
Medical marijuana, kind of a subject up in smoke. So.
All joking aside, it's a very serious issue for people and people who are in pain, and it is one that deserves serious legislative consideration. I think that the ultimate solution on that will not be at the state level. I think that at the federal level, a recategorization, if you will, rescheduling of marijuana to now a Schedule I drug, which means it's highly addictive and has no known medical use, to reclassifying that to a Schedule II, which means highly addictive but may have medical use, would allow for further study of, we have not had a serious medical study of marijuana in this country in the last 50 years. And we don't know fully what all the side effects are of either short-term or long-term use. And I don't know why we're not treating it like any other pharmaceutical, and that is studying to figure out, are these benefits there and quantifiable, or are the side effects too harmful to allow for that sort of use? And what states like California are doing is rushing in and saying, we're just going to make this legal for doctors to prescribe it without a body of medical knowledge behind it. And I don't think that's the right approach either. So earlier the senator called on you to be in touch with federal legislators on an issue. I would say the same thing here. I think that's where this needs to start if we're going to have a serious conversation about whether there's a medicinal benefit that outweighs potential side effects.
But go ahead, Senator Tyson.
Well, that is exactly what I've said before, is that it is a federal issue. One of my family members has top secret clearance and coincidentally cancer at the same time. So, and she lives in a state where it is prescribed as medicinal. She cannot use it. If she would use it, she would be in risk of losing her top secret clearance. So it does need to be addressed at the federal level.
Thank you.
And yeah, I agree. Because they've put off dealing with this issue essentially to do the studies or whatever it is, it ends up putting state against state. So you have Colorado, who's close to us, and we'll lose people to Colorado, or you have border things going on, or you end up putting people in jail for issues, all because at the federal level it's illegal. It's illegal to do studies. It's all this stuff. So I believe it goes back to that. And ultimately, we're dealing with bills like a hemp bill. That's an economic driver. But the questions come up. Well, maybe if you plant medicinal marijuana in the middle of a hemp field, you won't be able to tell the difference. And there's all these different things. So all these bills like hemp and medical marijuana become a gateway for complete legalization. So it's an issue that I feel like the federal government has passed on to us.
Are there committees actively in each chamber looking at medical marijuana?
We had a conference committee meet this week on House Bill 2049, which was a bill that had a lot of different hemp oil, reduced criminal penalties for marijuana possession in it, and it went through the Senate, and they made some changes, and so the conference committee met, and I don't know yet what product they'll put out on the floor, but it would not address Mr. Wiles' concerns, and it would not allow for marijuana to be prescribed medicinally.
The Senate did have a hemp oil bill, and that may address some of his concerns, but they did have a hearing on it this week. There was no action taken on the bill, though, at this point.
Thank you.
The hemp oil, though, is not medicinal, essentially, medicinal, but it's not the medical marijuana, though. I mean, that's the only way that people are even listening to it for the most part, I think.
Okay. Thank you. Quite another question?
Go ahead. Do you want to stand up and talk, please? Oh, well.
Okay, we have a struggle for who's going to ask.
She had a question.
I'm Sandra Hasler, and I'm the president of a little library board in Wellsville. And we received notice from Nichols, who is the regional library that we participate with. We're concerned about House Bill 2719. And I wondered if anyone would address that. It addresses the funding for regional libraries and is a real threat to small libraries, we think.
I can start to talk to it. I got calls from Becky. I got a call from people down in Garnett. I got emails and everything, and I was like, "What is going on?" And I heard about it from you guys before I heard about it in the House, and so I don't know everything on it. I assume it was something that came up on Friday, but I do know when Monday, okay. I heard from Becky, though, it really has to do, now, you're talking to a person, we homeschool, and we get all of our books from the library. We are there all the time. And we'll get books and movies and whatever else. My kids use it all of the time. So that being said, I feel like it's attacking homeschoolers. But I talked to Becky, and she said essentially it takes away from the transportation, getting materials, like if I want a certain book or they wanted a certain series, getting it actually to Wellsville from a different place, because not all the libraries can carry all the books, but the regional can actually, you can get it from a different library, Eudora or whatever. And so ultimately that it would shut that off. There's a lot of different things that it would mess up with our actual libraries. And it would pass that on to the local levels. And so that to the cities or whoever would pay for that. So that is, I will do everything I can to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, sure. Coincidentally, when Ottawa leadership was in, I mentioned the library. It came up. My husband and I, we are big users of the library. We don't have cable. We don't have Netflix. We're old school. So we do use the library quite frequently, and very supportive of it. I was surprised to see this bill come up. And, you know, what's interesting is there's 165 legislators in Topeka. And as the representative said earlier, you know, who knows where this legislation came from? So will it get legs? I don't know. I hope not, but I haven't seen the legislation. It is a House bill. So thank you.
Thank you for your service to the library up there. I'm a huge fan of libraries as well, and I've not seen the bill. The bill's in, I think, House Tax Committee right now. I have seen several mentions of the bill in my email. You know, I think the line should be changed to, you know, hath no fury like a librarian scorned. You all have access to computers and you're not afraid to use them. But I don't know that this bill will go anywhere. We're awfully late in the session for that kind of new idea to take root and really get a lot of steam. But this goes back to something we talked about, being involved, and the emails, the calls, and coming up to that hearing. And when you walk by a committee room and they've got the long white tables out and they're got testimony stacked on them as far as you can see, that's when you know something's going to happen or something's going to get stopped real quick. So I expect that's what the hearing room will look like on Monday outside of tax.
All right, thank you. And I want to thank all three of you for meeting with Franklin County leadership when they were up there. I was privileged to be there. I think, and I know that you all try and do that every year, but I'll tell you how important that is. There are legislators who do not meet with their constituents. That happens, believe it or not. But our legislators are good about doing that. So in about the last 10 minutes, I'd like to ask you a question, get one last question out of here, and then I'm going to wind up with the last question to you. Now, I'm not on the last question yet, so don't get excited. So the April revenue report, I was up there on Thursday, kind of just roaming the halls, and several of my friends up there, they were already talking about the April revenue report, and I heard thermonuclear mentioned in connection with it. So what are your predictions for that report, and how is it going to affect the rest of the budget process in your chambers? Representative Finch.
I'm going to get out my magic 8-ball, and I don't know what the numbers will look like in April. What I've been told offhand was that January was probably the best month of the next 4, and you saw how bad February was. The March numbers will come in at the end of this month, and then we'll have Craig, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, CREG, will meet in April and give us the big numbers, the estimates going forward. So those monthly numbers are revenue reports. The Craig Group will give us the estimate going forward. So I suspect that March numbers will be down. I don't know if they'll be down as big as February or not. Definitely has an impact on the budget. You recall the budget that was passed left a $6 million ending cash balance before the February numbers came out. So 6 minus 53, for those of you who are inclined, is around negative 47. The governor immediately cut $17 million out of the higher education system, did a 3% across the board cut, got us to $30 million in the hole, and there were some other sweeps and transfers that will be coming, and that's something I'd like to talk about when we get to time to close. But reality is we're in a bad financial situation. I expect it'll get worse before it gets better, and we, like all of you, hang on those numbers, and when they come out, we have been equally disappointed, and there are many of us up there, I think all of the folks at this table, who are trying to craft solutions, who are interested in having discussions about whatever it takes to resolve the problem, both short and long term, to try to get the state back to fiscal health so that we have stability for everyone that relies on state government or utilizes state government or just likes to have a state government that can open the doors.
Thank you, Senator.
We have a spending problem in Topeka. I know if I held this graph up, you guys couldn't see it, but we've actually, revenues increased in 2014 to 2015, but spending increased over, say revenues was approximately 2% increase, well spending was approximately 3% increase. So if you're spending more than you're taking in, you're going to have a problem, and that's what's going on in Topeka right now. And we've been working on solutions. One of the items that I've been looking at is currently how our tax structure. We do pick winners and losers with our tax structure. We need a fair tax structure that people are paying an equal level across the board. And so I'm studying this. I'm working hard on it. I haven't given up on it. I know you haven't heard much about tax this year, but it is on my radar, and it will continue to be. I'll continue to work for the best tax codes available in Kansas, and that's what we need to do. I just get so frustrated. The docking building. First off, we're going to spend 20 to 30 million to tear the building down, and now we're going to spend 3 million just because the governor pulls out of the contract. I mean, we've just got to be smart about the money. I could give you so many more examples of this, of how we're not spending money. We need to address the priorities for our government, not what somebody else's agenda is. And if you look at the A&M study that we spent $3 million for, it looks to be somebody's agenda, not a true study as to where the savings can be in the state. It was so disappointing to me. I spoke in committee, and I told everybody that that is exactly what that is. Iola, Kansas is in jeopardy of losing their DCF building. They were going to lose it over a year and a half ago. I fought to keep that open. We were able to keep it open thus far, but Iola shows up in an A&M report that it would be more efficient for our state government to close that office, that DCF office. Now that looks like somebody's agenda to me, not somebody doing their due diligence. When I asked what the metrics was for closing that office, I was told that it was the number of people in the office, the rent that was being paid, and the location. Well, all of those are established by the state. There's nothing that the locals did in order to create those numbers. That was state management. So let's get smarter. Let's rent a facility that more equates to the number of people that are actually working there. When I fought to keep the Fort Scott DCF office open, we found that they were spending $11,000 a year for a cleaning contract for a company out of Overland Park, Kansas. I guarantee you there are people in Fort Scott, Kansas that would clean that facility a lot cheaper. And so that's what we did. We looked at those contracts and we figured out how to keep that office open, and that's what I'm doing with Iola and other offices that are in my district. KDOT is also on the table for closing offices too. I had a meeting with them last week, and hopefully all the facilities in the 12 districts are safe, at least for a year, they've assured me.
Thank you. Kevin?
I want to say momentum, too, I think plays a role when you're asking about the April revenue report, and we're getting so used to the revenues being low that let's just think about it. If one comes in and it's 40 million above, then think about the legislature, then what they're going to, well, wait a second, what? So you can change the plans and just with one change. So I'm just saying that because you're asking us kind of to predict what might happen, and that could happen.
If it comes in above, we'll probably need counseling. I hope there are counselors.
Right.
One more question from the crowd, please, sir.
Dennis Strange, Ottawa. You brought up the issue of tax, and it's right before Richard's going to probably bring it up again. We kind of have a Fonzie problem from our administration. They don't want to say they're wrong and make a change. As a W-2 employee that runs a business and employs people, I get a W-2, so I'm going to help your April revenue estimates by paying my taxes. Have we thought about going back to the limited liability company and pass-through income and indexing that, looking at maybe indexing it to the Social Security of $118,000? Because as I talk to people in Johnson County, a lot of the individuals set up LLCs, and they were employees from law firms that used to get W-2s. I don't think that was the intent. Has there been any dialogue about changing that and indexing it as a compromise? Because compromise means good governance. Could you address the issue of the LLCs?
You guys want? Well, tax is one of my buttons, so absolutely. There was a Senate bill introduced that would address that. I don't know if the bill will get play or if it will get a hearing. I hope that it does. But there are people that are working on it and trying to address the tax structure in Kansas. One of the things that happened is, and most people aren't aware of this, but when the LLCs, S-corps, and sole proprietorships went to zero, if you live in Missouri and have your business in Kansas, or live across the state line and have your business in Kansas, your business went to zero income tax. However, the state that you live in still collects those taxes. So you didn't get a break on the business to create jobs or to do, all we did was send that money across the state line. So these are items that need to be addressed. And there's other things I could go on and on with the tax code. You know, as far as some food pantries do not pay sales tax in Kansas, others don't because they're listed in the statute. I mean, it's just no rhyme or reason to how our tax code is set up right now. And we need to look at it and put everything on the table.
I know the, I say I know what's going on. I know what's going on to a degree, the actual discussion. I'm up on the 5th floor. We have and I was saying this the other day, we have a conference room, and all the big tax folks were in there, chair, vice chair, people with ideas, especially this idea. I don't understand the indexing part of it, but I do know that they're looking at possibly putting money back on the businesses, if you will, taking money off of people who buy a lot of food, taxing food and stuff like that. So I know that those things are on the table. I know that, and again, I think that the revenue estimates and the money coming in will play a role on if it can actually pass. Oh, and then there's always veto.
There's a bill in the House on the LLC sub-SPs. My problem with all of the proposals I've seen so far on this is that they are basically putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. 70% of the revenue lost after the tax plan of 2012 was due to changes to the individual income tax brackets. The pay-fors, and by that I mean tax increases, because that's what they are, that have been put into place to try to mitigate that damage have fallen heavily on farmers who now lose losses. They don't get to claim those losses. They've fallen heavily on those who are medically disadvantaged who no longer get that exception. They've fallen on homeowners who get less on their mortgage interest deduction. And they've fallen on all of us who pay sales tax. And a large percentage of sales tax in Kansas is paid by businesses. So we essentially tax businesses through that sales tax increase as much as we taxed all of us in this room when we go to the store to buy something. So I don't want to have a partial solution. I don't want to have an LLC fix that has them paying at the lowest rate, the same rate that people who make less than $15,000 in the state of Kansas pay, because that's all that's been proposed on the House side, 2.7%, folks. So when you have an LLC and you make $1 million, you're going to pay the same tax rate as the guy or gal out there who is making 15 grand. So don't be fooled into thinking that we're fixing the problem with at least the House version of this LLC bill. And I'm just not interested in doing that. We get enough revenue to limp along so we can continue the Ponzi scheme and keep doing this, and we never touch on real reform. Whether you want to go to a flatter tax rate or you want to go to a tax on more things at a lower rate or whatever your vision of the fairer system is, I'm willing to entertain that debate and have the conversation, but this is not real. This is smoke and mirrors in an election year, and if it comes out, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be snake oil to make people think, oh, we're not like Sam Brownback, we're voting to fix this LLC thing. We're not fixing the LLC thing until they pay the same taxes as everybody else pays.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So we need to wind up. We went over a little. I imagine you three all have someplace to go. So what I'd like you to do in a short period of time is perhaps there's one issue you want feedback on or you want this group to know about. So who would like to go first?
I'll go real quick.
Representative Finch.
We have spent all week this week in the House Corrections Committee on a juvenile justice reform bill that may be one of the more significant pieces of legislation this session. We had 4 days of hearings. I know they had a week of hearings on the Senate side, and we're going to be working this bill next week. I don't have near enough time to go into all of it with you today, but keep your eyes on that. It is one of those good government things that's happening and not getting a lot of publicity and not getting a lot of press, but it has the potential to impact the young people of our state for generations to come, and I'm proud to be part of working on it. Thank you all. If you have questions or concerns, please continue to email or call me. Thank you for coming out today. Appreciate all of you and hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you. Senator.
There's so many issues before us, and we're going to have several bills that are worked in the next 2 weeks because they're trying to end up before the break to close shutdown session before veto session. We did pass the juvenile justice. We've passed other critical legislation in the Senate. You know, what's coming up before us, I did touch a little bit on wildlife and parks. It is very sad when our administration is not doing its due diligence. They paid for 9 tracts of land and only got 8. So one of the tracts of land they paid for, we don't have ownership of as a state. They didn't look to, or maybe they did, but they chose to ignore it. There's a noxious weed problem on the property that was purchased, and then on top of that, they purchased the land after the date that the legislature had approved the purchase by. So we have some rogue administrations, and we need to bring them under control. And it's sad that it's going to take legislation to do it, but that's what we're going to have to do. So.
Thank you. Representative Jones.
Quick story. I have a constituent, a family down in the Osawatomie area. They have a daughter that's Coast Guard. As you know, Coast Guard is not Kansas there. So she's up in Maine. Yeah, so she started her conceal and carry process. Her parents sent her away up to Maine. She came home, did a second part of her conceal and carry process back, and so it took, ultimately for an active duty military person, it took about 2 years to get her conceal and carry fully done through Kansas, which was just really difficult. She talked about it with me 2 years ago, and we've got that. It's actually going to be heard in the House on Tuesdays.
All right, thank you. Almeida, how'd we do?
I think you did just fine.
Thank you, so we can come
Just
back.
fine.
You
So-
didn't mention, though, losing part of the fines on traffic tickets or whatever that was.
Well, real quickly,
That was a Senate bill,
right.
and the bill is, odds are it's not going to make it out of committee. There was a hearing on the bill. Again, especially this area, I spoke with local leadership here, and they pay, to support that highway, the ambulance service, there's expenses involved with that. And I completely understand that, and so I don't think the bill's going to go anywhere. There hasn't been any movement. If there is, we'll see it within the next week or two.
Well, I just thought it was someplace that money was being swept away. Sweeping is such a
Yeah.
popular.
The other issue, though, is property valuations. I was going to touch on it real quickly. A constituent from Anderson County got in touch with me. They had 240 acres that went up approximately $9,000. Yeah, and their valuations went up 13%, while Franklin County's is actually up 15%. So if you had that same property, this is ag land. So if you live in town, you're fine, but agriculture land, we're on that 8-year rolling average. We had some good years, and right now, agriculture's having some down years. But we're caught in that rolling average because our property taxes are going up while our income is actually decreasing at the same time. So but we don't want Senator...
And it sounds like the bad times are going to roll for quite a while.
All right.
It is, and we
So-
don't want the senator from Johnson
So,
County's legislation by any means.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Paul and Matt. Thank you, Sarah. We will see you. The next legislative coffee is scheduled for April 9th, 10 a.m. right here.
When, April 9th?